Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Hi friends, it's Justin Brierley. Before we jump into today's show, I've some exciting news to share. The evidence for a rebirth of belief in God in the UK and beyond has been growing. Easter saw thousands of churches packed out, surveys are showing a remarkable upturn in church-going, and people are looking for God again. I believe the church is in a unique missional moment, and that's why I'd like to invite you to a conference, Responding to the Rebirth, taking place at All Souls Church London on Saturday the 22nd of November. Co-hosted by myself and Glenn Scrivener of Speak Life, we'll be joined by some very special guests and speakers as we help the church to be ready for this turning of the tide. This conference is for any Christian who wants to respond to the rebirth we're seeing. Ticketing will be available soon, but for now, mark your diary and plan to be with us on Saturday, the 22nd of November in London. More details to follow soon. For now, here's today's show.
Are you ready for a story?
This is the voice of storyteller and mythologist Dr. Martin Shaw, some 12 years ago, leading a storytelling workshop.
This is a story from so long ago. It was when men still had a hand on the tail of the wolverine. And the women. If I was to tell you about the women, I would have to say, a great firebird lived in their chest, and wherever these women's hips sashayed through life, red feathers fell. And it was a time like that that the Seneca people walked this earth and the great forests of this very land.
Over the course of decades, Martin Shaw had become a well-known and respected practitioner of storytelling and mythology, running the West Country School of Myth and publishing many notable books of poetry and story. Drawing on ancient tales and myths from diverse cultures, he aimed to help people reconnect to the transcendence found in nature and the wilds. The esoteric form of spirituality that Martin embraced seemed a far cry from the Christian home he grew up in. While he valued his parents' faith, he saw Christianity as too tame and domestic to be able to speak to his own wild soul. He assumed it was not for him. But in the winter of early 2020, on the final night of a long personal forest vigil, something changed. He told me what happened.
The whole process has been much, much more arduous than I expected. And I elect to do an all-night vigil in the middle of the forest. And there's nothing expected at this very late stage. I've had moments of insight. I've wept over my past life, all of this kind of thing. But I go up into the forest where there's the remains actually of an old Iron Age fort. Very cold. It was about -5, I remember. I'm sitting there in my big North Face parka, just down on the ground, waiting for this thing to end. But it is a night of prayer, because I've always prayed. It's just a little specific as to quite what I was praying to, but I knew it was a good idea to give thanks. I don't know why this happened, but my attention was brought upwards. It was one of those beautiful nights where there's little kind of pale blue stars, hundreds of thousands of them. And I said something along the lines of, I'm at the end of this experience of duress and bliss. And if there's anything you really need to show me, this would be a time. And then this thing happened. Where I look up and I can see one star that's not coloured like the other ones. It's not pale. It doesn't look like a normal star. It's a beautiful collision of colours, almost like the Aurora Borealis. Not quite. And I think, that's weird, it's getting bigger. and it's moving quite quickly. What I'm describing to you takes place over, seconds. And then I think, goodness me, it's sort of falling out of the sky and it's taking a shape. And the shape the thing took was a bit like the tip of an arrow with these colours across it, these beautiful sort of etheric colours. And I suddenly realised it was going to land just into the ground about 15 yards to my right. And it did. And it was utterly silent. It was utterly silent. There was no sound, just through the woods into the ground. So just to reiterate, I pray, I look up, and out of the sky falls this beautiful painted arrow of colours and just disappears into the ground of the forest. It's gone. I was so thrilled and heartened by it, I danced for the rest of the night, and I am no kind of dancer. And then I walked back down the hill to the cottage where I lived, and I got into bed. And as I was getting into bed, suddenly 9 words forced themselves into my mind. I had no control over it. Inhabit the time and genesis of your original home. Inhabit the time and genesis of your original home. Again, there's a bump in that. I still don't quite know what it was, but I knew I didn't like the word Genesis. I knew that was very odd. I fell asleep. And for 18 months, I ruminated because the next day, lockdown began. I had a lot of time on my own. And even then, I didn't quite connect the dots. I just knew that I had gone into the forest expecting to be wedded to the wild, and I'd come out wedded to Christ.
Martin says that as he began to connect those dots, grappling with the vision he had seen and the words he had heard, he came to realise that his lifelong search through mythology and spirituality from across the world had found its home in the last person he expected, Jesus Christ. But with the lockdown lifted, and as a new convert in his early 50s, where would he find his new church home?
I knew the notion that you want to find a room in the church building, and I'd been to see the Baptists and I liked the Baptists, and I'd been to see the Catholics and I liked the Catholics. I'd been to see the Anglicans and I liked the Anglicans. It was all very nice, but I don't need nice. I just don't need it. I need something a bit more exacting. Something that demands more of me, that is not taking its cues from a culture that does not care for it. And I found that in Eastern Orthodoxy. I was wandering around a shopping centre, believe it or not, in Exeter. And in the middle of the shopping centre, there's no roof to this thing. There was this old red stone building. It's the oldest Christian building in Exeter. And I just happened to walk in the middle of something called Divine Liturgy. And it was the transformative church Christian experience of my life.
Martin Shaw. Over the past year and a half, I've been charting the journeys of many Western adult individuals surprised to find themselves believing in God and coming back to Christian faith. But I've also been surprised by how many of those I've spoken to, Western converts like Martin Shaw, have ended up finding their home in a church from the East. Today on the show, we'll find out why a steady stream of new converts are finding faith in an ancient church, Eastern Orthodoxy. I'm Justin Brierley, and in this podcast series, I'm bringing you the inside account of why a meaning crisis in the modern world and the search for a better story about life are leading many 21st century people to reconsider Christian faith. Welcome back to Season 2 of The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Episode 13, The Orthodox Boom.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
It's Father Andrew once again, and today I want to talk about the surge of inquirers, catechumens, and converts into the Orthodox Church.
A year ago, Orthodox priest Father Andrew Stephen Damick began speaking on his YouTube channel about some remarkable stories he'd been hearing from fellow clergy in the USA.
First of all, the question is, what exactly is happening? Well, a couple of years ago now, I started hearing from a number of my friends who are clergy about a surge of people showing up to their churches, right? And often they would say things like, we are seeing more than we have ever seen before. And for a lot of long-standing clergy, a lot of clergy have served in parishes for a long time, they'll say, I am now seeing more inquirers, more catechumens than I have seen in the whole time that I have served in this parish. Not just all at once, but in some cases, more than all their previous years combined. And I can attest that about a year and a half ago or so at our parish here in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, we had more people that we were going to receive into the church than I myself had received in all the years that I had been the pastor of the parish, which was 11 years in total. So what exactly is going on? First off, I want to talk about the idea that the Orthodox Church has done something to attract these people. Here's what I've found. We haven't done anything. There's not been some big program, especially not a nationwide program with like all the jurisdictions, and definitely not a worldwide program where we said, let's do a big evangelistic push, right? Neither has there been some kind of like big shift in terms of the makeup of our leadership, right? The leadership hasn't suddenly shifted in one direction, ideologically, theologically, whatever. I mean, the church is kind of what it is. We don't tend to track these changes in terms of 5 or even 10 or 20 or even 100 years. We track them in centuries in the Orthodox Church. There's not some big change that's happened. And frankly, you know, the idea of trying to coordinate all these people to do something, anyone who thinks that just doesn't know how churches work. I mean, yeah, it never works that way. It takes forever. Yeah, it's not that. The Orthodox Church hasn't done anything to bring these people in. In fact, one of the people that commented said this, I can only speak for our mission. We haven't changed anything to make this happen or to try to draw them. It's just happening.
As Father Andrew Damick had witnessed, since the COVID pandemic, something had shifted and people were starting to turn up in extraordinary numbers. These anecdotal observations were confirmed by hard data last year with the publication of research by the Orthodox Studies Institute showing a 62% increase in baptisms and chrismations, where new members are welcomed into the church between 2021 to 2023 compared to the previous 3 years. But before we ask what has changed, it's time for a quick primer on Eastern Orthodoxy. The Eastern Orthodox Church is a major branch of Christianity characterized by unique traditions, liturgical practices, and historical continuity with the early church. It's not a single centralized entity, but rather a communion of self-governing churches that share a common faith and practice. So why Eastern? Well, most people have heard of the Reformation 500 years ago in Europe that saw various Protestant churches emerge from the Catholic Church. But the first major church split took place 500 years earlier. In the first 1,000 years of its life, the Christian Church had arguably been one universal church. But the Great Schism of 1054 led to a separation between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Church in the West, the Roman Catholic Church. While much of Western Europe came under the jurisdiction of the Catholic Church, across much of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, the Orthodox Church continued to predominate. And perhaps even more so than their Catholic counterparts, the Eastern Church has continued in its ancient doctrines, practice, and ritual almost unabated. In its worship, the use of religious icons, incense, a richly decorated and ornate church, and a lengthy divine liturgy goes back thousands of years.
So probably the first thing that I would have noticed as I first came to a typical Orthodox church were the smells, the sounds, the ornateness, the gilding.
This is scholar and author Dr. John Mark Reynolds, himself a convert to Eastern Orthodoxy, telling me what a typical church service looks like.
It isn't to be fancy. It's there to draw every part of my sensibility into worship because I'm a physical being. You stand up a lot in an Orthodox service. Most traditional Orthodox churches didn't have pews or places for anyone other than older people to sit. And the older people never sat. They're the ones that never sat because they've been standing up for decades. That kind of even exhaustion. Also, then secondarily for the heart, the Orthodox liturgy doesn't generally change. We journey through the life of Christ. We journey through the life of saints, many of whom are illuminated around us as a kind of window to heaven as we reflect on and ask, as that great cloud of witnesses, we ask them to cheer us on from paradise. This also engages our hearts. It's the very unchangingness that when you first go to an Orthodox church, it's very interesting. And so sometimes people want to rush to convert because it's cool to go. And the first Lent that you go through is kind of cool. Well, I'm suffering for Jesus and I'm giving up all these foods. But the nice thing, when I became Orthodox, did a good degree, worked hard, written a little bit, no one in Orthodoxy cares that I exist. Because they're a church of centuries, of millennia. And, if I'm not going to say anything that anyone cares about. And so that's a good thing, right? The church endures, the church contains a great cloud of witnesses, and so my intellect can engage with those people, and the liturgy itself will hold up to intellectual engagement and thought.
The sudden appeal of Eastern Orthodoxy in the West has caught everyone by surprise. It bears no relation to the typical growth model adopted by seeker-sensitive churches in the USA. Indeed, the denomination has always been relatively small in America, largely composed of expatriate communities. And one might expect its ritual and symbolism to be impenetrable to the average modern Westerner. So what has changed? Journalist Rod Dreher, another adult convert to Orthodoxy and author of the book Living in Wonder, told me why, in a disenchanted age, the ancient faith is finding new converts.
Yeah, we are having an Orthodox moan, it seems like, and I'm very upfront in the book about my Orthodox faith. I do center the experiences of Orthodox converts I know, not because I'm trying to convert people in the book. I wrote this book for all Christians and even for non-believers. But I do believe that there's something that the Western Christianity needs that the Christian East has preserved, that numinous sense, that mystical sense, and that this is a gift that the churches of the East can offer to the churches of the West in this time of their crisis. And I'm seeing it happen too, with many people turning to Orthodoxy now, desperate for that sense of enchantment that is so palpable within Orthodox services. And young men as well, especially after COVID, we've seen this happen. And I think the answer to that is because there's something about Orthodoxy that's deeply serious and involves the body. Orthodoxy, as opposed to so many Western forms of Christianity, is not therapeutic. I mean, it is therapeutic in that it wants you to be well, spiritually healed, but it's not about thinking better thoughts. My Orthodox priest in Louisiana once told me, he said, people come to the church seeking relief from pain. And I tell them, you can find relief, but you're going to have to go through surgery, and it's going to hurt more in the short term for you to be healed. But they don't want that. They want the pill, the spiritual pill that's going to mask the pain. Well, Orthodoxy appeals to young men, I think, because it gives them a challenge. It gives them the challenge of fasting, of overcoming self, and becoming a holier and better man, not just feeling better about yourself, but by doing things, and doing things with your body. That is so crucial. I learned a few years ago from reading Paul Connerton, the late Cambridge anthropologist, that all of the communities that have kept their traditions against the flood of liquid modernity did so because they had a few things in common. They held a sacred story in common. They celebrated the sacred story in an unvarying ritual. The ritual took them outside of time, they felt, and most crucially, they involved their body in celebrating the sacred story. And in that sense, the sacred story and its tenets got sedimented into their bones. Well, this is orthodoxy to a T, and I think that's what young men are responding to.
As Rod Dreher mentioned, and as we've heard in previous episodes of this season, one of the key demographics converting to Orthodoxy are young men, historically one of the least likely demographics to be religious. John Mark Reynolds leads the Orthodox Studies Institute and told me what their research has been revealing.
We discovered, and we're still in the early days of this, the research is limited, but it's good quality. We've had statisticians look at it, and we'll keep growing the research, is that we discovered married couples with children convert at a very high rate, and single women convert at a lower rate than married couples, but they do convert. But single men are the highest group of converts, equaling married couples or surpassing them in some cases. And we began to think about how to try to explain that. I have actually a different explanation than most people give, and it is that in the American context, in general, and I'm not fit to tell you why this is true, men are not doing well. They don't go to college in as high a rate as women do, and good for women. You don't want to suppress the number of women that are going to college. They're not going to grad school at the same rates as women, and they exhibit antisocial behaviors in a much higher rate than women do. And if you think about people who convert, if your life and worldview is working for you, you're not necessarily looking around. You're looking to fix the things that aren't working for you. But if in general, you go to college, you're doing pretty well, you've got a decent job, then you're not looking for, what's wrong, what's broken in me. And so I think the male population, single male population, it's no big insight to say that in the U.S. context, at least, it's not doing very well. And so if you're in a group that's not doing very well, looking around and saying, what's wrong with me? What is truth? Is there a way out of this pit? And often this leads to very bad answers. So, for example, I've had to interact with young men who are attracted to Nazism and fascism. And over the whole course of my career, I've had many students attracted to Bolshevism or extreme views of Marxism. But for the first time, I began to run into college-age people who were attracted by really bad forms of fascism, not the misuse of the term, but they, wanted Mein Kampf for Christmas as a Christmas present, an English version. They were, but it was because it's a very evil thing, but they were looking for something different. And since the establishment didn't seem to like them, and since the establishment rightly, I will underline, hates Nazis, they began to look at, well, am I hated like the Nazis? And is there some truth there? So I think orthodoxy, eventually, for those who kept thinking and pursuing the truth, engaging in the truth, you come to Jesus because Jesus is the center of the Christian faith. And having come to Jesus, where can I experience Jesus in a timeless way that will minister to the whole person? We talked about how the liturgy engages head, heart, and hands, the body. And I think eventually young men explore that inside of Orthodoxy. The other advantage we have in the U.S. is people are very familiar with other forms of Christianity, and they carry the burden of that familiarity. We have our own mistakes. You only have to look at Russia and the Ukraine to avoid any sense of Orthodox triumphalism. But in the U.S. context, people can kind of, I'll quote the vice president, the previous vice president, unburdened by what has been. and they can see what might be. So I think there's some of that as well.
I get the sense too from some of the young converts I've spoken to who've gone in the direction either of a sort of quite traditional Catholicism or Orthodoxy. It's entering something that's quite different, that demands something of you, that can be quite difficult to understand, actually, not necessarily easy.
And I want to say something about timelessness. The liturgy itself has slowly evolved over time. If you dropped into first century Palestine, no one was doing the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, right? It grew out of temple worship. It grew out of the synagogues. Prayers were added over centuries. The point is, the liturgy is timeless in the sense that the entirety of church history, right back to the first century, and some of the most ancient prayers in the liturgy can be found, and it isn't changing with the minute. It's changing with the century. And so, I had a mentor who said, there's some big social issues that are going on right now, and the mind of the church needs to reflect on them, and we'll let you know in 300 years what we think. So as a dialectically based analytic philosopher, I want to think about it and write a paper and tell you not what you should think, but enter into dialogue with you. But the church, universal, isn't sitting in dialogue with me. It's saying, okay, here's what we've received. This is what's true. It has to be applied to your life. It has to be applied to the 21st century. We're a church of the vernacular. Wherever we've gone, we've translated the liturgy into the vernacular of the people. So we're a church that changes in a sense, but it isn't in a marketing sense.
Since the end of last year, several major news outlets, such as the New York Post, have published articles on the extraordinary influx of young men into the US Orthodox Church. But the headlines often claim a political motivation. At the start of this year, the Daily Telegraph published an article titled, "Young Single Men Are Leaving Traditional Churches. They Found a More Masculine Alternative." As young men veer increasingly conservative, should we be worried about the political motivations of the young men flocking to orthodoxy? The question came up recently in a live Unheard conversation between theologian Esme Partridge and author and Orthodox convert Paul Kingsnorth. Esme Partridge began by explaining where she had seen young women gravitating.
I think the politics of re-enchantment is incredibly interesting, precisely for the reason that you say, because on the one hand you have witch talk, which is overtly politically progressive usually. So when Roe versus Wade was overturned, a lot of these witch talkers were making content along the lines of, well, we're going to hex the US government and we're going to actually cast malevolent spells on them because of their banning of abortion, attempting to ban abortion. And so there's a highly politicized dimension to the appropriation of witchcraft and the occult on the left. But similarly, as you describe, there is also a highly politicized form on the right. And it's interesting, actually, how, yes, some of that is very much going towards traditional Christianity. They have this vision of Christianity as this masculine, this kind of empowering masculine religion that they, kind of strongman Christianity, I guess. But equally, you also see a lot of far rights dabbling with paganism, appropriating paganism because they perceive that to be the most effective revolt against modernity. They sometimes will, in their genealogy of modernity, they will actually say, well, Christianity is part of the problem. Part of the modern world is Christian because the kind of effeminacy, the perceived feminine side of submitting to a God that they believe is there in Christianity is deemed sort of too liberal, I guess. So I think that's a very interesting observation. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Paul.
Just an interesting point of fact, the founder of Wicca, Gerald Gardner, was a member of the Conservative Party. Interestingly, he was a very strange, brilliant, eccentric Englishman from the 1950s who pretended that he'd rediscovered an ancient pre-Christian goddess religion when actually he'd made it all up. And then, but not of new cloth. He'd mixed it together with Freemasonry and Wicca and all sorts of other things. A bit of Aleister Crowley. So I'm not sure Gerald would have approved of the witch talk girls. And they did do a lot of, they did hex Trump quite a lot as well, which obviously worked really well, didn't it? So they did a lot of that. Yeah, there's a lot of young guys going to Orthodoxy and to the traditional Latin Mass. Obviously, the danger of that is if they think this is a political right-wing response to the bad woke people, then they're in the wrong place for the wrong reason. Having said that, people get brought into the church for all sorts of weird reasons, including me, and you never know what you're going to find when you're there. So there's a thing going on. There's a thing going on with young people. You can see it. I mean, those are two examples, right? So you've got young women going to witch talks, some of them, young guys going to very traditional forms of Christianity, because they think, by the way, a lot of these young guys, they want a Christianity that's really going to challenge them. They want a spiritual war. And if you do that right, spiritual war's good. If you're fighting the demons within yourself, if you've decided to fight the enemies in the world, it's different. But they want a Christianity that makes them do 100 prostrations a day and fast for 40 days before Christmas and go to the liturgy every week and stand up for 2 hours. Right, it's what you have to do in Orthodoxy, which is interesting, but it's like they want a spiritual challenge. So in all of these ways, some of them false and some of them real, people are just searching for God and truth. But like I say, you can go to the wrong place, like the witch talk people do. You can also go to the right place, say the church, for the wrong reason, because you think it's a way to politically fight the people you don't like, which is a danger as well. But all of it's just indicative of the spiritual search, especially amongst young people. It's really interesting what's happening amongst that generation. It's like my generation was a hopeless, lazy bunch of good-for-nothing Generation X people who couldn't be bothered with anything. Yeah. We are a shameful embarrassment, and I apologise to the world for Generation X is a complete waste of time. But something's going on with young people because they're living in this void. Yeah. My generation was living on the fumes of Christianity, right? So we could live in this vaguely liberal, quite nice society where things kind of still held together, but we didn't really have to be Christian or think about much. Although even back then in the 90s, you could feel the nihilism growing. But now it's just everyone's facing the void. And so they're going looking for something. Like I said, the question is then what you find.
Absolutely. And I think, just to add to that, I think one of the reasons for this is that Gen Z don't have the same baggage that millennials and Gen Xers had, where they've grown up with some residue of Christianity. They think it's uncool. There's still this element of trying to rebel against it, whereas since Christianity is no longer hegemonic culturally, what are you rebelling against? So I think there's this openness to it that comes with that.
I first came across Kingsnorth's own surprising rebirth story when he wrote a viral essay for First Things in 2021 titled The Cross and the Machine, telling the unlikely story of how a celebrated author, poet and environmentalist who had travelled through atheism, Buddhism and even Wicca had ended up finding himself drawn through intellectual inquiry but also dreams and visions towards Christianity and ultimately the Orthodox Church. Here's how he described his quest to me on an edition of the Re-Enchanting podcast.
I was looking around at all the churches. So you become a Christian, you think, well, what's the church then? There seem to be about 100 of them. What's the actual real one? Where should I be going here? So I was praying a lot about that, but I was also going to churches and sitting in them and seeing what happened. And eventually, as I said, I went to this Orthodox monastery, and that was a very powerful experience. I met a priest there, and I talked to him, and I just kept going and going and going. And there was an experience in the Divine Liturgy in the Orthodox Church, which I haven't had anywhere else. The Orthodox Liturgy is usually at least 2 hours long. You stand up all the way through, right? The Orthodox Easter service will start at 10 p.m. and finish at 2 a.m. No messing around with the Orthodox. Sometimes people ask me the difference between Eastern and Western Christianity. I say Eastern Christians have better beards and stronger legs. That's fundamentally the difference. But, you know, there's something, Orthodox Christianity comes from the East. And it's two things have happened there. Firstly, it's been persecuted for much of its history by Islam or later by communism, which has made it very strong, paradoxically. It hasn't had very much power. And secondly, it hasn't had to deal with modernity. It didn't have a Reformation, didn't have the Enlightenment, didn't have the Renaissance. So it hasn't been hasn't been hacked about by humanism, basically, in the same way. And so and it also has a much more mystical core, I think, than Western Christianity. Obviously, there's mysticism in Western Christianity too, but generally, I think it's ended up, especially in the Protestant countries, much more moralistic and rationalistic. And that was the sort of Christianity that I came across at school. I think it's a sort of list of moral rules, and obviously the moral rules matter in Christianity, but they're not the heart of the thing. They exist for a reason. And I found in the Orthodox faith, firstly, something which hasn't been compromised and muddied around by the modern world, but also something which can take you really much deeper than I've ever experienced in the Western Church. And I think, especially in the West since the 60s, the Church, all the churches, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, all of them have tried to, I don't know if they've tried to compromise with modernity, but they've tried to make the church more appealing. You know, we've got that's the trendy vicars, right? And I don't blame them. It's a sort of rational thing to do. They think, well, no one's interested in the church anymore. Maybe if we make the hymns sound like pop songs, people will come back. But they won't, because they just want the pop songs. And then the church looks weak. So weirdly enough, the more the church has tried to speak to or adapt itself to secular modernity, the more it just seemed like a compromised thing that doesn't have anything alternative to say. Whereas now, I think when people are looking at Christianity, they say, look, what's the alternative to the world? Which is actually what Christianity is supposed to be, right? St. Paul says, don't be conformed to this world. The church is not the world. It's in the world, but it's not of the world. So we're not supposed to be conformed to the world. And now that the world is becoming so awful in so many ways, people will say, well, where's the temple of God? What's happening in the temple of God? And if it's the same thing as is happening in the world, if it's just activist politics or, you know, pop songs or whatever, then why would you go? What has it remained? If it's the word of God, it should remain unchanged, right? And it should be strong and it should be beautiful as well. The other thing about Orthodoxy is there's a great deal of beauty in it. The icons and the incense, it's a kind of full bodily experience that really feels very powerful. So there's something in there that I think we have lost in the West or given away. But since I started writing about this and talking about it, I didn't really intend to go around writing and talking about Christianity all the time. It just seems to have happened. And I thought, well, maybe I should do it because maybe that's what I'm supposed to do with this writing thing I have. Maybe that's what God wants me to do, or maybe I should just do it to help others out. But since I've started doing it, I've had a lot of letters and emails. I can't even answer them all, from people who are in a similar sort of position on a similar journey, often coming from a similar place, who said, yes, much to my horror and surprise, I'm also attracted to Christianity. What do I do? And I can't really help, but except by telling the story. And just by talking like this, other people can look and say, oh, yeah, maybe it's all right. Maybe it's not just me. Maybe I'm not mad. I think people will be ready for actual serious Christianity again, you know, full strength Christianity, not the weak worldly version, the real thing. And I think it's starting to happen. I can feel it, especially amongst younger people, interestingly. In my generation, younger people, you know, I've heard so many stories. I mean, even somebody like Jordan Peterson, who isn't a Christian, although we can't stop talking about it for some reason. I don't know what's going on there, but he'll give lectures about the 2-hour lectures about the book of Genesis, and it'll fill up with 20-year-olds. You know, that would never have happened 20 years ago, even 5 years ago. There's something going on that's pulling people towards it. Yeah, I mean, it seems to have happened to me. And I think it's happening to a lot of other people as well. So yeah, I think it's like the more worldly we become, the more we worship the world, the more we start to do increasingly dark and disturbing things, trying to live forever, upload our minds into the cloud, create new life itself, the more this sort of pull towards actual faith, an actual God rather than the false one, is gonna be stronger. I think I'm feeling that's happening already.
Like Kingsnorth, Martin Shaw was attracted to Orthodoxy for its numinous, mysterious, immersive way of engaging God that transcended a more rationalistic approach to scripture and worship that the Protestant Reformation introduced. But as he told me, it takes some getting used to.
I'm having to come to terms with, for example, when we read from the Bible, it's chanted. It's not really read in the way that post-Reformation Christians are familiar with. And I like reading the Bible, you know, in my own voice with my own twists and turns. And that doesn't roll in Orthodoxy, and it's not going to roll in Orthodoxy, because with Orthodoxy, the clue is in the name.
Yes.
The clue is in the name. I have a joke. How many Orthodox Christians does it take to change a light bulb? Change? Probably no change. So yes, sometimes it's difficult because I have a kind of improvisational spirit. I do. But the liturgy itself, interesting things to note about it. Effectively, it's a sung theology. So we're singing rather than reading, or if we are reading, we're chanting. The liturgy itself is a very, very slow form of dance that's been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And you do feel that you've moved from, this will sound a rather highfalutin analogy, but it's worth making because we have the time to do it. In poetry, there's many types of poetry, but there's one type called lyric and there's one type called epic. I grew up with lyric Christianity, not epic. Now, what that means is lyric poems have a lot of I in. They have a lot of back rub in. They have a lot of, I feel this, he's in my heart. Jesus is my friend. He's here. I'm tired. Please look after me. That kind of thing. It's very personable and I like it. But epic poetry pays far less attention to the I statement and lifts you out of that completely into this much bigger drama. Classicism is epic poetry. And I think what I found in Orthodoxy is the little I entered the big we at that moment. And that's just something about the West in general that I'm exhausted by, the kind of addiction to the confessional almost. So actually for me, it regulates my ego. And one of the things in Orthodoxy is a real distinction between what they call passion and virtue. And the world we live in these days is pretty good at passion, pretty good at desire. But virtue, to make a covenant with limit, to understand what that looks like, those are the kind of things that I'm going through with Orthodoxy. To distill it, finally, one more thing is, although I may look like a reasonable human being, I'm actually really a 12th century chivalric knight. I always have been. And Orthodoxy is a code. It's a way of behaving in the world. You can draw it with a line. It's not massively ambiguous all the time, but there are areas where they just say it is a mystery. And I like that. It's that combination.
The conversions of Paul Kingsnorth and Martin Shaw are high-profile examples of influential writers and poets coming to faith. But one of the most influential YouTubers making the case for orthodoxy today is thinker and icon carver Jonathan Pageau. He told me why he believes so many educated Western people are now discovering Eastern Orthodoxy.
We are seeing waves of converts. I mean, parishes, some are doubling, tripling, like just massive amounts of conversions. But the conversions, they have a certain characteristic, which is they're intellectual conversions, and it's not as much the kind of usual, not usual, but the story of someone who maybe hit rock bottom, who's been having all these problems and turned to God, and found God in their struggle and in their suffering. But it's really people that are, university graduated, that are professionals, that are thinking, that are reading, that are quite intelligent, who are actually dealing with a meaning crisis and that are looking to find meaning. And so that's to me is a very interesting. I don't know if that's something that you've noticed as well in this movement, that it doesn't look like early Christianity was slaves and poor people and women and people that had no recourse, basically finding the God of love in this possibility of Christ. And right now, it seems like it's actually an elite that's converting.
I think nonetheless, the way that you have opened up faith is obviously quite meaningful. Paul Kingsnorth, Martin Shaw, others have gone on similar-ish journeys. What is it, if you like, that's leading to those folk, intelligent, highly, sophisticated 21st century people being able to jump in, making that leap that, as we've said, some others kind of somehow find it a little bit difficult to step into?
Well, I think one of the things too that is helpful to us is in some ways the desert of secularism. And so I think people also notice like how in America, for example, especially like just how dead the suburbs are, just how horrible and monstrous even city planning and how community is broken down, how there is no capacity to join into unity, into anything, noticing the families break down, noticing that things are shattering at every level, and that the new atheist promise that if we could just have enough stuff and be rational secularists would make us happy is nonsense. Because actually, no, without unity, without purpose, without something joining us together, we fall into fragmentation socially, and then we fall into despair in ourselves. And so I think that we're helped by that, because people then look around and say, well, what is it? Like, where is this unity? Where is this thing that joins together? Where is this beauty? Where is it? And then they inevitably fall, I think, on the things that are beautiful. Whether it is that old church in your city that you realize, wait a minute, like that's actually beautiful. All these other buildings are monstrous glass, horrors. But what made this possible? Like, what made these things possible? And so, especially for the artistic types, like you said, like Martin Shaw and Paul Kingsnorth, I think that Orthodoxy is attractive because they're more akin to the beauty that is presented and to this pattern. They already live in a world of literature and a world of relationships, of forms, and so they can see that there's this coherence and this rhyming that you see in the Christian tradition, which a lot of the secular, let's say the materialist Christians, had wanted to remove out of superstition or out of a desire to be modern or a desire to be progressive or whatever reason they had. But it's leading us to a desert, really, that type of thinking. Like the entertainment church, I think, although there's still big churches, I think it's over. I think the entertainment church it's on its death knell.
Why I'm Still a Christian. After 2 decades of conversations with skeptics and atheists, the reason I believe. That's the title of my new book, and it's available now. Read my case for faith after a lifetime hosting debates between atheists and Christians. Find out why God makes sense of human existence, value, and purpose, and learn how to respond to some of the toughest objections to faith. This is a book to inspire confidence in Christians and to help seekers explore the claims of Christian faith. Why I'm Still a Christian is available now at justinbrierley.com, where you can also get exclusive signed copies. Or, when you become a gold level supporter of this show, you'll get a free signed copy of both my books. Click the link with today's show info to buy or to support.
It's summer. Time to enjoy long days, lazy nights, and great food. Because Uber Eats has deals all summer long. So, when hunger strikes, don't sweat it. Delicious deals are just a tap away on Uber Eats. Enjoy all your favorite grocery items delivered straight to you. Get ice cream, soda, and snacks from your favorite stores like Wegmans and CVS and make the most of every moment. Now that sounds like a good summer. Order now on Uber Eats. Terms apply. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
I read an article the other day that made me want to kill myself. It was about soft launching your boyfriend on Instagram.
Please tell me more.
This is Gen Z influencer Freya India appearing recently on the hugely popular YouTube show Modern Wisdom with Chris Williamson.
So it's about telling girls, so this young woman wondering, how should you announce to your followers, like not influencers, like I'm talking ordinary young women, how should you announce your boyfriend? Should you do a soft launch where it's just like his arm? Or should you do like a full reveal? And it's like, but it's kind of messed up because it's like, this is like introducing a brand deal or something. Like we're literally viewing our partners like products.
Freya India is the author of a popular Substack, Girls, where she charts the challenges of relationships, social media, and anxiety-inducing modern culture for Gen Z women like herself. What's less well known is that Freya India has recently been exploring Eastern Orthodoxy herself, proving that it's not just young men being attracted to the faith. Having come from a completely secular background, she told me how she was influenced especially by other adult converts, including Paul Kingsnorth and the conservative analyst N.S. Lyons.
And both of those two were atheists before, or at least not, because they had a journey.
Yes.
both those two, Paul Kingsnorth and N.S. Lyons, both of their writing really reached me. And I think that's because they've been on the outside. And both of them describe the same thing as me, this kind of nagging feeling that something's wrong and they're searching for more. There has to be more to life than this. And so I just kind of thought, well, this is the path they're going down, and I think they're on to something, the truth. And so, yeah, I have been on that journey, but slower than they have, I think, partly because I'm young, so it feels more daunting.
Yes.
And also because, it's not been a part of my life. But I do agree with Paul Kingsnorth about this fear of Christianity becoming like a culture war weapon or like a thing to signal.
Yeah.
So I have kept it to myself a lot just because I don't want it to be something that is part of my like personal brand. You know what I mean?
I get that. What is it, I suppose, about that particular tradition that has attracted you? I know that for Paul Kingsnorth, he said it felt like coming home because Orthodox liturgy pulls him in, and it appeal. I guess it just, as a poet and a writer, it feeds a very important part of his soul.
I think it's the same. I've spoken to N.S. Lyons has spoken about this, is that we're very in our own heads and intellectualize things. And when I was first kind of learning about Christianity, I kind of thought, oh well, I'm reading the books, so that's kind of enough. And I can intellectualize it, and then it just becomes like work to do. So I definitely agreed with him that it's much more of a feeling. And also it's so traditional. So I think what's anxiety provoking about the modern world is the rapid rate of change, and there's nothing to depend on. So you can't depend on right and wrong. You can't depend on you can't even depend on commitments and vows anymore, because we can just so easily kind of weasel our way out of them. And so I think the attraction is towards something that is so stable.
Yeah, it changes so slowly that it feels like, it's there whether I like it or not, it's going to be the same.
And I think a lot of young people are actually finding themselves drawn to these like permanent, stable things, because nothing in this world is permanent. It's really hard to attach to anything because it's just gone.
I asked Freya why more men seem to be embracing the faith than women.
I think young men are really struggling now, but I do think people have answered the call. So there are institutions and organisations trying to help young men. Young men are going back to church, but it's young women now who are really veering the other way. And so young women are the least religious demographic. We're the most liberal, and in my experience, the least kind of hopeful. If you speak to young women, they don't have faith in themselves, they don't have faith in God, they don't have faith in relationships, they don't have faith in just the opposite sex in general. There's just a real kind of hopelessness. And I think the problem is now we have churches and Christians who are trying to attract young men and kind of just leaving young women because they think, oh, we can't even approach them, they're so far on the other side. But they're the ones who desperately need it, I think. Not necessarily to become religious or conservative, but I do think just hearing that there's another way can give you permission to say no. And again, make you realise that this kind of liberal therapeutic worldview is a worldview. You can opt out if you want. So yeah, I'm really trying to now help people to kind of attract young women, because I think they're in desperate need.
Freya India's conversion as a Gen Z influencer to Eastern Orthodoxy is another reminder of the appeal that the faith is having for young people. You'll be able to hear my full conversation with Freya later in this series as we look at whether there's a religious rebirth on the horizon for Gen Z women. Also coming up later in this season is a conversation on whether the future has a church, recorded on stage in London for Theos. I, along with all the panellists, agreed that the future does have a church, and it was Bishop Mike Royal, General Secretary of Churches Together in England, who pinpointed where he has seen the most signs of renewal.
Three big areas of growth is the Orthodox Church. So I believe there's about 3 million Orthodox Christians now in the UK, and many of them are coming from communities that are not post-Christian. Secondly, the Pentecostal and charismatic churches are growing. Redeemed Christian Church of God plant churches like they're going out of fashion. Unbelievable. And then a third area that's actually beyond our reach, and that is a lot of migrant churches, people who are coming here perhaps to work. Their communities are setting up churches. And so there's an incredible groundswell of these churches in communities. And so it's a really interesting picture when you move away from the historic churches.
Bishop Royal's diagnosis maps well onto the subsequent data from the Quiet Revival research, showing that high church expressions of worship, such as Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, as well as charismatic and Pentecostal churches, are gaining adherents faster than any other part of the church. Journalist Mary Harrington was also present for the conversation and reiterated just why.
The churches which are growing are the very high church and the very low church. So the charismatics are growing, and the Greek Orthodox and the very high Anglican, and anybody who does the bells and smells, and anybody who does the clapping and the hand waving, they're doing great, and everybody else is they're just dying. That's happening, and it's following that pattern with the hollowing out in the middle, is because those are the churches where people feel something. I mean, if you just want an experience, you want to go shopping on Sunday, there's no shortage of places you can do that. But if you want to feel the thing, and you don't necessarily know how to put that into words, then you need a form of worship where people do the thing, and aren't embarrassed about it. And honestly, that's at the high church end and it's the low church end. Everybody in the middle is desperately embarrassed. Respectable, institutional, middle of the road, spreadsheet wielding, PowerPoint mongering Christianity is probably toast, and I for one will not warn it. I think the fire is rising. I really do, and I think it's coming up. It's bubbling up in unexpected places, and people are encountering the divine in unexpected ways, and they're finding ways to see the spirit world directly again. And to perceive that all of that is real, and it is right there. You just have to open your eyes. People see it.
As we heard in our last show looking at the Catholic revival, the formal, liturgical and traditional aesthetic of the church isn't the only thing attracting young people in search of something deeper and more stable in their lives. Gen Z are also way more open to the supernatural than their parents and grandparents. And as John Mark Reynolds explains, there's no shortage of such phenomena in the Orthodox Church.
We're also a church of miracles. I mean, we're a church of weeping icons and hagiographies that, if you look at, one way of looking at history would be the intercession of the saints and how they've held us back from nuclear annihilation. Now, I don't advocate historians in a secular context always work that way, but the possibility of the miraculous, Orthodoxy doesn't deny it, but it also doesn't become crazy about it. So that, any local person who decides some woo-woo thing has occurred, we all rush over and take a look at it. Again, we'll say, well, in 100 years, we'll really know what Father so-and-so and his weeping icon were up to. And then we might canonize the person. That will be cool. And so as a church that, every church does celebrity and gets bitten by it. It's not that we don't do it. But there's no money in it inside of Orthodoxy. And so we don't usually get as many grifters.
You can hear mine and Belle Tyndall's full conversation with John Mark Reynolds on the Re-Enchanting podcast. Rod Dreher, author of Living in Wonder, told me why, in a disenchanted landscape where Christianity has often been mediated by the intellect alone, people are searching for the experience of God again.
Perhaps the only rival to Augustine for the greatest intellect Christianity has ever produced is Thomas Aquinas, who wrote the Summa, the probably the most complex conceptualization of the Christian faith that ever was. And yet, in the last year of his life, he was celebrating Mass on December 6th, I think it was 1273, And he had a vision, a mystical vision there. We don't know exactly what he saw, but he told his secretary that after what I have just seen, everything I've written seems to me as so much straw. And he never wrote another thing and died within the year. Well, there you have it, percept and concept. And in the modern age, because of various historical and philosophical and even theological events, we have allowed our Christian faith to become almost entirely concept. What I'm hoping to do with this book is to draw believers more to the perceptive side of things, not entirely, because we need to be able to talk about these things intellectually. But I'm tracking in parallel, Justin, with Ian McGilchrist, whose life's work seems to be to help people understand the brain hemispheres and how they affected culture. And as you know, I know you've talked to him before, Ian says that we have gotten stuck in our left brain in the analytical side of the mind and lost touch with the right brain, which is the perceptive faculty. And Ian doesn't believe that we should exchange one for the other, but he said we need to have more balance. Therefore, says Ian, we need to lean more heavily into music, into poetry, into the ways that allow us to perceive truth in other ways, in non-propositional ways, and not only perceive it, but participate in it. My Eastern Orthodox Christianity, I'm a convert of 18 years to Orthodoxy, it really emphasizes this, and it has helped me to grow greatly in the service of Christ.
We began today's show with a clip from Father Andrew Stephen Damick's own surprise a year or more ago at the unexpected signs of revival in his own church. I recently sat down with Father Damick, who runs Ancient Faith Ministries, for a conversation on the turning tide in Eastern Orthodoxy. What's your own journey then? Because as I understand it, you were raised in a more sort of typical evangelical US background. Parents were missionaries?
That's right. My parents were evangelical Protestant missionaries. Although when I was first born, my dad was in the Navy. But when I was 7, my parents became missionaries. Then when I was in college, I began to ask questions about what is the relationship between truth and beauty and worship. And that led me on a journey to begin to explore historical forms of worship. Because I was raised basically Baptist, although my last stop in the Protestant world was the beginnings of a megachurch in the mid-1990s, where there's a band on stage and lighting and that kind of thing. And I remember having a conversation at a college-age Bible study that I belonged to when I was in the evangelical church. And I started talking about these things. I started talking about, I wonder what is the role of tradition and history in Christianity. And the other people at the Bible study just kind of looked at me blankly. They just had no idea what to say. And I didn't either, but I was asking the questions. One of the catalytic moments was I had a conversation with a friend of mine who was also a missionary kid, and he had decided to become Roman Catholic. And in the course of that conversation, he started telling me about all of his difficulties with Protestant theology. And it was clear to me that the reason he wanted to become Catholic was not so much out of a love of Roman Catholicism as a dissatisfaction with where he was. But I realized a lot of things that he was saying made sense to me in terms of criticisms. And in the course of that conversation, the Orthodox Church got mentioned, not because he really knew anything about it or I knew anything about it, but it was just sort of thrown out as a side comment, as I recall. And I spent the next few weeks reading everything I could find on the internet about it, which in those days was not a lot. And then got involved in some email discussion groups. And then finally someone invited me to an Orthodox church. And it was a very small mission that was meeting in a borrowed chapel space that belonged to an Episcopal church. And even though it was very simple and none of the glorious iconography and so forth that you associate with Orthodox churches, what I saw that day convinced me that heaven in fact touches earth in a way that is palpable and that you can actually experience and not just think about. You can actually have that experience in a 3D reality. And so even though on that day I didn't make any decisions about church, in my heart I realized that I wanted that and couldn't live without it.
Interestingly, one of the most significant things has been this apparent extraordinary rise in the number of young men, especially, and young families entering the Orthodox Church in the USA. And I think it's been repeated elsewhere as well. You've certainly been seeing this and talking about it. Just maybe could you just first start by telling us what's been going on? What are some of the statistics seem to be telling you about the rise in interest in Orthodoxy?
So about 3.5 years ago, after having had a few conversations with fellow clergy, I went into a Facebook Orthodox clergy group and I just asked a question. Have you been seeing more inquirers and catechumens and converts than you've been seeing before? And then I had dozens of responses, which says to me, okay, this is much bigger than just a couple of anecdotes. I mean, still anecdotal. But these are priests saying, my parish is suddenly having all these people. It's more than we've ever seen before. And some of them had been serving for years and years. And then a little while later, then I put out on one of my Facebook pages, I said, if you've seen a rise in inquirers and so forth in your parish, I want to know where you're from. I want to hear from you. And I think I received something like 700 or 800 responses from people, and so it was clear to me that this is not just an anecdotal thing happening here or there. What I personally have seen, and as I travel around and do speaking engagements and so forth and talk to people who have converted in just the last 5 years, it is true that there does seem to be a certain plurality of young men, but also I'm meeting many, many young families, and especially people with children. But I've also met older couples. The one demographic that seems to be lagging behind all of this is young women. And my sense is that because the Orthodox Church, we didn't get together and say, okay, let's do a big program of outreach or anything like that. There was no coordinated thing. And I've had people say to me, oh, it's this person on YouTube or it's this podcast or whatever. That's the thing. And I said, but they were doing that for years before this happened. Why suddenly, how is that? That can't be the catalyst, And as I said, I really think that it is the pandemic, that there's something about the pandemic that pushed a lot of these people in the direction of the church, but then some people, it kind of pulled them further away from it. And it's still a puzzle to me as to why it is that young women are the exception to this. And it's my understanding this is not just the Orthodox, that we're seeing this in a lot of places. But I think that part of what's going on, I think part of the appeal to young men is that the feeling is that the world has become boundary-less, that the world has become shape-less. And when you encounter the Orthodox Church, there is a very clear shape. It's the service has a very clear order to it. I mean, our clergy dress like this, it's all recognizably structured and so forth. And there's a hierarchy to it. And frankly, for those who have knowledge of Scripture, it mirrors what you see in Scripture. It's mirroring the hierarchies that are in heaven, the hierarchies that you see in the early church, the worship that you see in those places. And I think that, especially because, I'm not a psychologist, but one of my impressions in hearing a lot of confessions and dealing with men is that men are very concerned with boundaries and with structure and shape, and that's part of what gives them meaning. And in a world that seems to be pushing all those things off to the side, Orthodoxy says, actually, this is life. This is the way that life should be.
There have been a few fairly high-profile articles. Now, you may not agree with the kind of take in the articles, but one, I think, in the New York Post that was widely shared talked about young men searching for a more masculine version of Christianity. And is that a fair characterization of what they're looking for if they're finding themselves in the Orthodox Church?
So I think that there are some people that is what they are looking for, but I don't think that is what they are finding. Because the Orthodox Church does not have a particularly, it's not trying to be masculine or feminine, right? Our highest saint is a woman, the Virgin Mary. She's the one that is the great exemplar. And I mean, she's a woman. She's the essence of femininity, right? There is this sort of, I don't think it's a real bumper sticker, at least I hope it's not, but there's this kind of bumper sticker about Orthodox Christianity that goes around on the internet. And I actually wrote a whole article against this at one point because I just kept on seeing it. And it says, Orthodoxy, Christianity only tougher. I was like, that's wrong. It's Christianity, period. It's not tougher than Christianity. It's not Christianity plus toughness. Certainly we have disciplines that can be very difficult, the fasting, the long services and whatever. But historically, the people who are doing that the most successfully and the most consistently, as we've seen, are women. The stereotype, for instance, in the Russian church throughout the period of communism is that churches are just full of a bunch of old women because those are the ones showing up with those iron knees. and standing there forever and ever.
And it's really interesting because a lot of the latest statistics are telling us that, interestingly, Gen Z are actually the most open to spirituality. Half as likely, according to a recent poll in the UK, half as likely to be atheist compared to their sort of millennial and Gen X parents and grandparents. I mean, do you notice a kind of that experiential spiritual thing happening when people actually suddenly find themselves drawn to the church?
Yeah. I recall, when I was a kid, growing up in evangelical churches, the big sort of apologetical push was to convince people of the existence of God, right? And, all kinds of apologetical courses and books that you could, read and so forth.
I was part of it.
Right. And I mean, I think that there's absolutely still a place for that, especially for some of the super hard questions. But in my experience, the people that are showing up at church or that I have conversations with, many of them, that's not the question that's on their mind is, does God exist? Which is a kind of intellectual question. Now, for some people, it is a very existential question, like, where is God? That's the existential, like, where is God in my pain and suffering, right? But for many people, the way that I would describe it is, they're not so much concerned about whether God exists or not. They want to know what they can do about the demons that they actually are experiencing. And it might be, demonic experiences like the one I described with the driver, but it might also be a sense of hopelessness or watching, for instance, great evil happening in the world, suffering and monstrous kinds of behavior by human beings. How can that be possible without some kind of spirit that's behind it, that's sort of driving that? And so the existence of the demonic is much more apparent to people. And sometimes when people ask me, well, why do you believe any of this stuff? The first question I ask them is not, do you believe in God, or don't you believe that someone made all of this? Which I think those are important questions. But rather, have you ever experienced real evil that you don't have an explanation for?
It's so interesting you say that, because I've also bumped into people where it's easier to start a conversation about the devil than it is about God, because people kind of have opinions, actually, and they're almost more willing to believe in a negative spiritual realm because they've possibly bumped into something that made them think it exists. Maybe we're at a moment where the Christian story has an opportunity to speak into people's lives again.
Yeah, I think so. And the reason why I think that it is speaking more powerfully than all these other stories is the same reason that it did this in the first century. When Jesus Christ is first preached to the world, it's a world full of worship of demons. From a Christian point of view, that's what the gods of the nations are. They are demons. They're not fairy tales that don't exist. They are actual malevolent spirits that people are in communion with through their sacrificial systems and through their ritual practices. And so when Jesus is preached, the message is that the kingdom of heaven is at hand, which means all these other kingdoms are about to get trashed, right? It's just like the Lord's mother said, he has thrown down the mighty from their seat. Those are the demonic powers that were oppressing the world, and has exalted those of low estate. Those are the righteous that are going to be taking their place, basically, as delegated sort of governors in the world. And so when this is preached, Jesus is doing all these exorcisms. He's throwing them out, and it's actually proving that his person, and so therefore his story, is the highest possible story that there can be. Because the most that one of the other gods could offer you, and one of the things that the Bible says is, look, they offer you all these things, but they can't follow through. But the most that they can offer you is victory in battle, success at seduction, your crops doing well, fertility for your wife. Like, that's the most that they can offer you. But they're all small. Even Zeus himself has a territory, Poseidon has a territory, Hades has a territory. But God, our God, is in heaven and on earth, and he does whatever he wills. So the proclamation is of a God who is of a completely different order than all the rest. And I think that in this moment, while paganisms are only kind of one piece of what's kind of rushing in, the Christian story is still the highest possible story.
Do you see this extraordinary moment that the Eastern Orthodox Church is having? Is it, what do you think it is? Would you call it revival? Would you call it a sort of just a moment, we'll see what happens and what God does with it?
I have tended to be kind of circumspect. I mean, I'm definitely on the front edge of it. I meet many people that will say to me lovely things like, because of something I read from you or listened to you, this is why I'm here now, And I always tell them, I said, okay, then you owe me a debt of prayer. Please pray for me, But I'm trying not to say, okay, this is a huge revival that's happening and there's this bright future, because whenever Christians start to focus on success, that's a failure, right? What we're called to is faithfulness. And so I have tried to sound a very practical note, say, okay, there are many people in our churches that were not here before. Welcome, we're very glad to have you. Now begins the work of becoming rooted, becoming planted deeply in this place. I have a friend who has a church where over half of the church have been Orthodox Christians for less than 5 years. Wow. And it's hundreds of people. And on the one hand, he's lining up all these people that are converting and doing baptisms, and it's glorious. It's absolutely amazing. Should be celebrated and so forth. But the second thought that I had when he told me that was, wow, that sounds like a lot of work. Yeah. Because you have all these people that need to be stabilized in the church. And I think this is one of the things that Orthodox Christianity has all the tools for. We're not always that great at using all of them, but we have all the tools for stability. And so that's the thing that I try to say is welcome. We're absolutely very happy to have you. But what you're here for is to be trained, and to be trained to be a Christian, because we know that when we stand before God at the end, He's not going to ask you questions about, the correctness of your theology. You're going to be judged on what you did. We're going to be judged on, it says in the scripture, by all of our deeds in the body. So that's actual actions. And so it's that life of faithfulness that we're trying to point people towards.
This episode is brought to you by GMC. GMC certified service technicians are factory trained to fit your vehicle with the tires specifically developed for it. And with our tire price match guarantee, you get the best fit for the best deal. Let us do the work. Available on select eligible tire brands at participating dealers only. Offer ends 12/31/2025. Terms apply. See dealer for complete details. Visit gmc.com/service to learn more.
Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. 9.5 plus pH, now in cans.
Refreshing.
Made for every way you move.
Should I run a marathon?
Let's start with finishing that water. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant, now in a sleek can. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
So I recently went to church, and I have to collect all my thoughts about this now. Technically, I went to church for the first time a month ago, several weeks ago, for the first time with my wife, because she has been going to church. She recently became a Christian again.
The YouTuber Apostate Prophet, aka Ridvan Aydemir, recently posted this video to his channel. He's become well known in recent years as an ex-Muslim who, for the past 10 years or more, has embraced atheism and rational secular humanism in its place. But a few months ago, he announced that he was considering another change of mind.
I have a Muslim background. I have nothing to do with Christianity except that I grew up in a Christian country, Germany, and that I also went to a Christian Catholic kindergarten. But anyway, I went to church for the first time with her, and that was the first time ever that I attended a service on a Sunday. When I went there for the first time, I was a little bit overwhelmed. I didn't really know what to think. It's an Orthodox church, so I witnessed the divine liturgy, as it is called, and I tried just following along with it and observing it and all that. I think after the first time visiting there, I felt a little bit overwhelmed and I didn't really know what to think. But this last weekend, I went willingly, deliberately to attend and to practice and to participate, to see how it goes, because I felt the will and the need to participate. And technically, I consider this the first time that I actually went to church to participate. And the first thing I felt was, I felt a warm welcome. Smiles from people, a nod from the priest, a warm welcome from the priest. He saw me when I first visited, so he came to me and said, "Welcome back, I'm glad to see you here." There was a close attention by the priest to help those who are new to the church, to help them along with the liturgy. So he would occasionally look at me and to some others who were new and just tell us what we are doing right now, where we are in the liturgy, so we could follow along. And it was quite easy to follow. And I did follow the liturgy, which is an ancient, beautiful liturgy. There are certain things that I recognized in the divine liturgy, the different prayers, the different chants, the different processions. The one thing that I was most, the one thing that I felt very, very, very deeply was in preparation of the communion, of the Eucharist. The prayer following up to it. There is a part which is about, like the thief, we say, "Remember me in your kingdom." I think that's how the wording goes. Chanting that out just made me shiver. And I don't know, I've always had lots of respect for Christianity and Christian practices and Christian prayers and all that. And Christian tradition, biblical stuff. I spent so much of my time over the years studying Bible, whether it be the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible, or more recently the New Testament. I read through the Gospels, studied the life of Jesus, and then to find so many parallels and so many references in the liturgy on a Sunday service to everything that I learned was kind of nice. Now, since I'm not a baptized member of the church, I didn't receive communion or anything. I just received a blessing from the priest, which felt very nice. And after the divine liturgy was over, which I think lasted quite a while, up to 2 hours maybe, I don't know. And time just went by. It didn't feel long. I participated and time just went by, and it was beautiful.
After 10 years as a confirmed atheist, followed by 2 years of searching and investigating, in March this year, Aydemir was brought into the Eastern Orthodox Church as a catechumen, one undergoing the preparation for baptism. He says that his journey has brought him into contact with other traditions too.
I think that I still have a lot of good feelings about Catholicism. And in fact, I would say the first thing that I started to do in terms of Christian practices was to do the rosary, which is, I still carry it with me. I use this to do the rosary, and I still do it. I asked my priest about it. He said there is nothing wrong with it. I think the whole connection with Mother Mary and the practice here is what drew me really closer to Christianity and made me love it. I still feel the need to go back to the rosary and all that. And I have a connection to Catholicism that I appreciate. I always thought that Catholicism was my favorite version of Christianity. I don't have any opinions on the doctrinal differences between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, although I see where the Orthodox tendency or decision to go their own way and to stick to the tradition were seemingly very valid within a traditional Christian perspective. And I also I like Orthodox worship. When I witnessed the divine liturgy, I loved it. I love going to church on Sunday now. Like during the week, I feel kind of empty, and I feel like I can't wait for Sunday to come so that I can go and participate in the liturgy again.
Aydemir's gradual change of mind from atheism towards Christianity has been aided by fellow YouTuber and Christian apologist David Woods, who challenged the apostate prophet with a Pascalian wager that it's in your own interests to try Christianity.
David, like many others, have often said that if you are an atheist, it's basically you exist, you live, you go through life, you search, you analyze, and so on. You believe in what is true and what is not true, and then in the end you die. That's it. You're dead. So living a life of an atheist doesn't really lead anywhere. In the end, you just die anyway. If the whole world all exists for no other bigger purpose, no greater purpose, all of existence is just going to exist and at some point cease existing. Or it will just exist forever and ever and ever for no purpose at all. So if then in the middle of this, right, if in the middle of this, religion is true, or Christianity is true, you could add some great purpose to your life and live a meaningful, great life. Believing that Christianity is true is actually a better way to look at the world than believing that there is no God and atheism is the correct analysis. If you live your life being convinced that atheism is the correct analysis, you just live your life and you die in the end anyway. But what would be so bad about simply choosing to live a Christian life, for example, if the Christian life is going to look better for you? For me, I would say, after many years of consideration, looking at a Christian life seemed to be a much better option. It's an option with much more serenity, with much more meaning, instead of the whole the void and the hopelessness, the nothingness. I always forever just depended on simply wanting to pursue truth and always go with what I am 100% sure of. When I went to church, I actually had a conversation with an Orthodox Christian monk, and he said something very, very interesting, which kind of changed everything about how I viewed the world. After I told him that for the last 10 years I only pursued facts and only went for something if I knew that it's 100% true, he said to me, with Christianity, nobody ever expects you to know that something is 100% true, which is why we call it faith. If with something else, like with atheism, you want to go for it and you want to make your next step always knowing that whatever you make a step toward is 100% true, then you are going to make steps and rely only on your mind. You will be led by your mind, by a mind that you yourself know is very limited and very weak, like all of our minds. And in the end, you will not become a Christian, but rather try to find meaning and find a solution to things in your life. But the irony of it is that you will live your life with all of your skepticism, and in the end you will not be able to help yourself. You will simply die and then cease existing. What's the point of that? You didn't really help yourself. All you did was just to be skeptical and then to die. Why not just go this path? And I thought, you know what? That's kind of an interesting way to look at things. It makes more sense than what I did for the last 10 years. Anyway, long story short, it was kind of a leap of faith.
A leap of faith is often the way people refer to embracing Christian faith. But it's not a jump into thin air. It's a stepping out in the expectation that we'll land on something solid. And in the end, Christian or not, we're all trusting ourselves to something. Today, many people, like the apostate prophet Ridvan Aydemir, are finding that the atheistic secular humanism they once put their faith in doesn't seem so solid, that story no longer holds together and isn't strong enough to build a life, or indeed support a whole culture upon. Many are looking to a much older, deeper, and yes, more mysterious and miraculous story, and finding there the stability and foundations they need to make a step of faith. In these past 2 episodes, we've seen how the most historic church streams of all, Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, are being renewed as a fresh wave of converts looking for a better story about reality, discover both ancient wisdom and new life. But as we'll see in episodes to come, this turning of the tide is bringing people to the door of churches both ancient and modern as the rebirth continues. You've been listening to the surprising rebirth of belief in God with me, Justin Brierley, continuing to tell the story of why many secular 21st century people are considering Christianity again. Please do share this episode with others. A rating and a review also helps others to discover the show. If you'd like to read this podcast, well, it's also a book, and I'll send you chapter 1 for free when you subscribe to my newsletter. And for good measure, I'll send the first chapter of my new book, Why I'm Still a Christian, as well. Just a reminder as we close out, it's only your giving that makes this show possible, so please do consider becoming a monthly supporter. Silver supporters get early access to new episodes as well as bonus content, and gold supporters also get signed copies of both my books and a monthly catch-up call with me. The links are with the show notes. Coming up next time.
Fire comes down inside the Holy Sepulchre itself. People for like 8 minutes are putting their hands through these big flames and it's not burning them. Justin, it happened.
We heard a little from him today, but next time you can get my full conversation with journalist and author Rod Dreher on his own rebirth journey and why the supernatural is back. But it'll actually be 2 weeks before that show lands because as we approach the halfway mark of our series, we're returning to a fortnightly schedule. It's been great to be able to bring you weekly releases so far in season 2, but you can expect most of the rest of this season hitting your podcast player every other Tuesday on a fortnightly basis. But as ever, you can actually listen to that next show right now when you become a silver or gold supporter. Just one of the perks of helping me to make these shows. As I've mentioned, do get on board if you can. The links are with the show info. The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God is a production of Think Faith in partnership with Genexus and the Jerusalem Trust. Thanks for being with me. See you next time.
Whatever the occasion, effortless elegance is right this way. Because Hilton brings you new ways to stay courtesy of the Nomad London. And it doesn't stop at award-winning dining in a space draped in velvet and illuminated by vintage chandeliers. No, this day goes beyond with unparalleled personalized service and attentive hospitality. Oh, and did we mention the Nomad London can be booked using your Hilton Honors points at Hilton.com? Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Don't be left in the dark. Find out about our latest shows, upcoming events, and recent articles by subscribing to my Think Faith newsletter. It'll arrive once a fortnight, and I'll even send you the first chapters of both my books, Why I'm Still a Christian and The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, for free when you sign up. And if you want to support this show, you'll get early access to episodes and bonus content when you become a silver supporter. Gold level supporters also get signed copies of both those books and the chance for a monthly catch-up with me. Your support makes a huge difference. The links for the newsletter or to support are with the show info, or go to justinbrierley.com.